Hey y'all, this is Lori Eberly, and I am here to share some of my own experience as I'm trying to unlearn all of the lies that I have been fed as a white woman, born and raised in the United States of America. I am not a teacher, I am not an expert, and it's really important, as many of us are feeling more called to do the work of anti-racism, that we find folks that can hold us accountable and that can share experiences with us. And it's important that we do this with accountability. And I cannot hold you accountable. So I really strongly encourage you to find a group with a professional who can help to lead you through what it means to look at ourselves and understand not just bias, right? I think unconscious bias is a euphemism because it's too hard for a lot of folks to admit that they've actually internalized racism. I think that's part of the work to do, is to recognize it's hard to see how our education and the systems that have taught us and that we live in, you may have heard folks talk about dismantling white supremacy. And if you're new to this work, that sounds kind of radical. I had a friend who, a friend is too close. I had an acquaintance that I knew because our kids went to the same school and we didn't know each other well. And this was years ago, and she would post about white supremacy on Facebook. And I remember quite literally thinking, tone it down a little bit. I see what you're trying to do, and it's important for us to be allies with the Black community. But I think that calling out white supremacy is going to shut people down. It's going to shut people off. We need to have a softer approach to this. So if any part of you is having that averse reaction to the use of the word white supremacy or this idea of dismantling institutional racism, totally okay if that feels a little bit out there to you. Just stick with it. And what I want to share is when I do these are resources that have helped me and a few questions that I'm pondering. And so today I want to talk about this book. I had the opportunity to see the author, Isabel Wilkerson, when she was here in Portland a few years ago with Oregon Humanities. And this is my signed copy. And a lot of times when I have signed copies, I don't loan them out and I would never give them away, and I cherish them. And even though I believe that, this is a winner of the Pulitzer Prize and a national bestseller, and one of the greatest writers and pieces of work that this era will ever see, it would be really silly for me to keep it on my shelf. So I will loan it out to a local person, and I really want you to consider ordering it for yourself. And I'll tell you why. It is so thoroughly researched and packed with data, but it does not read as an analytical academic book. And the reason is because she has woven into it these three beautiful stories of real men and women, and explored their great migration from the South into Harlem and Chicago, and I believe it's LA. It's been a few years since I've read it. And I just want to give you just the context of where the title comes from. In the beginning, there are words from Richard Wright, and these words are, "I was leaving the South to fling myself into the unknown. I was taking a part of the South to transplant an alien soil, to see if it could grow differently, if it could drink of new and cool rains, bend in strange winds, respond to the warmth of other suns, and perhaps to bloom." And for those of us who are, what you'll hear, digging into the work, are trying to do on this long, slow, epic journey of unlearning all the bullshit. What this book does is really help you understand that while slavery may have ended 400 years ago, and even though the Jim Crow laws that existed in the South back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, don't quote me, I haven't read this recently enough to be able to quote it, that ending Jim Crow laws does not end practices. It does not end culture. It does not bring justice. And The Warmth of Other Suns really helps to understand, the reader to understand the systemic patterns and the history and really predictable patterns of race in America. And I highly recommend it to you. Okay, so we've reviewed one resource, The Warmth of Other Suns, and then I want to talk about a few things that have been on my mind this week. I am currently midway or almost finished with a 6-month anti-racist class that I've done with Jor Consulting, and I'll put that in the comments below. My teacher is Rebecca Greenidge, and she is so skilled at what she does. And what I want us to understand as we're trying to figure out how to be more reflective and understand the Amy Cooper in all of us, is that while being an anti-racist certainly requires action, a lot of it is about looking deep within and learning to ask different questions and learning to see the very same things that you see all the time in a different light. And here's what I'll tell you I mean. So, in the days since the death, since the murder of George Floyd, and it is important to call it a murder because let's name the elephant in the room. George Floyd died because of police brutality, and a lot of us are outraged or sad or overwhelmed or some combination of all of those. And part of my response to that is that while I have been vocal about my values and beliefs, particularly around social justice on certain platforms, I have not been nearly as transparent on LinkedIn because that is a professional space. And we have been taught that politics and religion are not acceptable to talk about at work. And somehow talking about racism, talking about bigotry, has been labeled political, and that we're not supposed to talk about that at work. But that is one of the lies that we need to unlearn. Racism, systemic racism, white supremacy is not defined by the personal or the professional or religious or political. It is everywhere in this country. And we have to be talking about it at work. And one of the things that I noticed is that I have worked very hard and very intentionally and very deliberately to expand my professional network over the last several years. And living in Portland, Oregon, which has a reputation for being a very white place, it means that my LinkedIn professional network is the result of years of cultivating professional relationships. And there are Black and brown colleagues that are part of that relationship because I believe that their experience and their leadership matters, will contribute to the success of RADIUS, and that RADIUS cannot do effective, powerful work in this world if everyone I work with and hire looks like me. So in LinkedIn, I have racially diverse space. On Instagram and Twitter, part of my learning is to deliberately follow thought leaders. And these are people that I don't know. And so I have been following lots of Black and brown and indigenous folks of color so that I can open myself up to non-white dominant culture. And I will do an episode where I share who some of those voices are, and I highly recommend it. But what I realized is that of all the social platforms that I have, and I use LinkedIn a lot, I use Instagram because I'm very visual, I use Twitter, but I'm new to it in the last few months, and I use Facebook mainly just personally for family. I realized that my Facebook page is white as fuck. And that's because it's largely just personal relationships. It is like yours, probably my high school friends and my college friends and my neighbors and my besties. And what has come to my attention in the last week or two is just how white that space is. And I challenge you to look at your Facebook page. And I challenge you to look at other platforms that you use. And I want you to just scroll through your followers, scroll through your likes, scroll through who your connections are. And I want you to ask yourself, what is the story here? You don't have to feel good, bad, and different about it. It is, what is the story here? Why does my LinkedIn page look like this? Why does my Facebook page look like this? Who am I surrounding myself with? Who is influencing my thought? Who are my children playing with? Who do I work with? What does my industry look like? Who are the authors that I read? Who are the people that I follow? If you're a 40-something middle-aged liberal woman like me, are you following Brene Brown and Glennon Doyle and Elizabeth, what's her name, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love? Are these the voices that are influencing your thought? And I'm not asking you to throw them out. I'm asking you to add to them. And I think for white men who may be watching this video, to look at that also. Who are your business connections? Who are you tweeting with? How different are the perspectives and lived experience of the people that communicate with us through our phone every day? Okay, that's one place that we can look at. The other thing I've been thinking about, I went to protests this week, a smaller one on Sunday with a couple of friends, and then I went on Tuesday downtown where there were thousands of people. And before I left, I asked my kids if they wanted to go. And actually on the Tuesday before I went to the large one, I took my 15-year-old daughter downtown to Pioneer Square, and because she had seen it all day in Snapchat and her stories from her 14, 15, 16-year-old friends, and she seemed eager to go, and so I wanted to take her. And when we got there, there were very few of her friends there, and I said, where are your friends? And she said, well, they asked their parents, and their parents didn't want them to come because they didn't think it was safe. I am not here to judge those parents. I am just here to ask the question, what are we afraid of? We may be afraid that our kids will get tear gassed. We may be afraid that our kids will have rubber bullets shot at them. We may be afraid that our kids will be in an area where looting is happening or windows are being broken, that there is a sense of danger. And those are super real and valid concerns. And again, I don't believe that judging and shame is going to be very useful as we do this work together. All I can do is talk about my experience. And my experience is that my children are 12 and 15, and they have some sense and understanding of risk. They understand that COVID is a risk. They understand that it's been really important for our family to be isolating. And they understood that to go and break that rule, to engage in protesting, is because I, as their mother, determined that the pandemic of racism has cost too many Black deaths. And while COVID remains a very real threat, especially in Black and brown communities, that I needed to put my body in the action. that I needed to show up and take up some space to say that I am putting myself on the line here, and that if my children wanted to do that, they could also do that. So the question is not, will you let your children protest? Will you let your children take risks? That can be part of the question. But if part of that answer is, no, I'm afraid, I want us as white parents to really think about, and how does our fear compare to the Black mothers and fathers and aunties and grandmothers and grandfathers, to what they must experience every time their child walks out the front door. And I decided, my choice was that the risk to my white teenage kids protesting in Portland, Oregon at a peaceful protest during daylight hours was a risk that I was willing to take. And is it possible that something would happen? Absolutely it is. And I actually invited that discomfort and anxiety to set in my body because I think there is a lesson there. And I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just letting you know what my process was. And that I am really trying to learn and practice what it is to sit with discomfort and to sit with my own fear. And that is a lot of what this anti-racist work looks like. Learning to sit in discomfort, learning to sit in pain and fear, and not project that outwards, but to learn to reconcile with that and understand what answers wait for us. So I'm going to leave it there today. I'm trying to keep these in the 15-minute marks, and we're about a minute too late. I will leave some resources down below. Again, I'm no expert, but if you're willing to learn and you need someone to learn with, I will keep showing up with you. And thank you for giving a shit about the cause. Expect to make mistakes, own them, and show up and do the work some more.